If I'd known that working the late shift would change my life forever, I would have quit the second they posted the schedule. It was supposed to be a quiet, easy gig, a few hours of cleaning, stocking shelves, and sitting behind the counter of a small 24-hour diner just off the highway. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous. My name's Mark. I'm 28, a college dropout trying to scrape by while I figure out what to do with my life. My girlfriend, Emma, keeps telling me I'm too smart to waste away in dead-end jobs, but honestly, I don't mind the simplicity. There's no boss breathing down my neck, no coworkers to deal with, and most of the time, the customers are truckers or road trippers looking for coffee and a quick meal. Tuesday night started out like any other. The diner was dead quiet, save for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional crackle of static from the old radio near the register. Outside, the highway stretched endlessly in both directions, the asphalt shimmering under the dull orange glow of the streetlights. At 11:15, I was wiping down the counter when the door jingled, signaling my first customer of the night. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a scruffy beard that hadn't seen a razor in weeks. "Coffee?" he mumbled, barely glancing at me. "Sure thing," I said, grabbing a mug and filling it from the pot. "Anything else?" He shook his head, sliding into the booth closest to the window. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the mug. I chalked it up to exhaustion. Truckers like him came through all the time, their nerves frayed from too many hours on the road and too little sleep. Still, something about him felt. He didn't touch his coffee. Instead, he stared out the window, his eyes darting back and forth like he was expecting someone or something to appear. "You okay, man?" I asked after a few minutes. His head snapped toward me, and for a moment his expression was pure terror. Then he blinked, and it was gone, replaced by a forced, almost sheepish smile. "Yeah, just tired." I nodded and went back to cleaning, but I kept an eye on him. At midnight, he left without finishing his coffee. I watched him shuffle to his car, a beat-up sedan with a dented bumper, and drive off into the night. For the next hour, the diner was empty again. I cleaned the tables, restocked the sugar packets, and flipped through an old magazine someone had left behind. Around 1 a.m., I noticed something strange. The coffee mug he'd used was still on the table, but the coffee inside was ice cold. That wasn't the strange part. What caught my attention was the handle. It was coated in greasy fingerprints, smudged and uneven like they'd been made by claws. I froze, staring at the mug. "Get a grip, Mark," I muttered to myself, grabbing it and tossing it into the sink, but I couldn't shake the unease. At 2 a.m., the lights flickered, not unusual, given how old the place was, but the radio crackled too, spitting out bursts of static and garbled voices that sent chills down my spine. I turned it off. The diner felt different now. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder, almost oppressive, and the air was heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and grease. Then I saw it. In the reflection of the glass door, a figure stood outside. I spun around, but the parking lot was empty. When I looked back at the glass, the figure was gone. I locked the door. By 3 a.m., I was counting the minutes until my shift ended. I'd convinced myself that the shadows and sounds were just my imagination, the result of too much caffeine and too little sleep. And then, the bell above the door jingled. I nearly jumped out of my skin. A man walked in, but it wasn't just any man. It was him, the guy from earlier. Same gray hoodie, same exhausted face. "Coffee?" he mumbled, just like before. I nodded, my hands trembling as I poured him a mug. He sat in the same booth, staring out the window. Something was wrong. He wasn't wearing the same clothes. He was wearing the exact same clothes. The same stains on his hoodie, the same rip in his jeans, and his hands were trembling the exact same way. I wanted to say something, to ask if he was okay, but the words wouldn't come. At 3:15, he got up and left, just like before. The mug was still warm this time, but the fingerprints were the same. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. At 4 a.m., the lights flickered again, plunging the diner into momentary darkness. When they came back on, the radio was on, blaring static at full volume. I turned it off, my hands shaking. The bell jingled. I didn't turn around. "Coffee?" His voice was barely audible, but I knew it was him. Slowly, I turned to face him. He stood at the counter, staring at me with bloodshot eyes. His hoodie was torn now, and his jeans were covered in dirt. "Coffee?" he repeated, his voice hollow. I backed away, bumping into the shelves behind me. "What do you want?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, his hand trembling as he pointed at the window. I followed his gaze and my stomach dropped. Outside, the parking lot was full of figures. Dozens of them, all standing perfectly still, their faces obscured by shadow. The man at the counter leaned in close, his breath reeking of something foul. "They're here," he whispered. The lights went out. For a moment, there was only darkness. And then the sound started. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I fumbled for my phone, but it was dead. The growling grew louder, closer, until it was right behind me. I turned, but there was nothing there. When the lights came back on, the diner was empty. The man, the figures, the growling, all gone. But the mug was still on the counter, filled to the brim with cold coffee. I quit the next day. I don't know what I saw that night, and I don't want to. All I know is that I'll never work another night shift again. If someone told me that my life would change forever because of one overnight shift, I wouldn't have believed them. But now, as I sit here in my one-bedroom apartment with the lights all on and the curtains drawn, I can't ignore the fact that something followed me home that night. Most nights, this shift started like any other. It was a Friday night, and I was scheduled to work from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The office building was completely empty by 9, save for the cleaning crew, who left around 10:30. By the time I clocked in, it was just me in the empty hallways. I was scrolling through social media at around midnight when the first odd thing happened. The elevator dinged. I froze, staring at the monitor that showed the elevator camera feed. The doors slid open on the ground floor, but no one stepped out. "Probably just a glitch," I muttered to myself. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that crept up my spine. The elevator stayed open for an unusually long time before the doors closed again. I watched as it ascended to the fourth floor, stopped for a moment, and then returned to the ground floor. The fourth floor was empty, just rows of cubicles and a couple of conference rooms. I figured maybe one of the motion sensors up there was acting up. I decided to check it out. Grabbing my flashlight and keys, I headed for the elevator. The air felt cooler than usual, but I brushed it off as my imagination. When I reached the fourth floor, the hallway was eerily silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears strain for any sound, even if it's just the hum of the air conditioning. I did a quick sweep of the area but found nothing out of the ordinary. "Just a glitch," I said again, my voice sounding hollow in the empty space. Relieved, I headed back to my booth. For the next hour or so, everything was quiet. I even started to relax a little, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. But then, at around 2 a.m., I noticed something on one of the cameras. A shadow moved across the fourth floor hallway. It was quick, so quick that if I hadn't been looking directly at the monitor, I would have missed it. My stomach dropped. I rewound the footage, but the shadow wasn't there. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. "You're just tired," I whispered. "It's nothing." But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. At 3 a.m., the motion sensor alarm for the stairwell went off. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and headed straight for the stairs. As I opened the door to the stairwell, a cold draft hit me. The air smelled faintly of damp concrete and something metallic, like blood. I shone my flashlight down the stairs. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed, but there was no reply. I climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the fourth floor landing, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and my flashlight flickered. "Great," I muttered, giving it a shake. The hallway was empty, but something felt off. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and the shadows seemed darker than they should have been. I was about to turn back when I heard a faint whisper, just barely audible. "Danny." I froze, my blood turning to ice. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. And then, the whisper came again, closer this time. "Danny." I showed my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but there was nothing there. Panic set in. I turned and bolted for the elevator, slamming the button repeatedly until the doors opened. As the elevator descended, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. When the doors opened on the ground floor, I practically ran back to my booth. For the next hour, I sat there, staring at the monitors, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But then, At 4:30 a.m., the power went out. The monitors went black, and the hum of the fluorescent lights disappeared. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, but the beam felt pitifully weak in the vast darkness. And then I heard footsteps. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. And then, just behind me, I heard the whisper, "Danny." I spun around, my phone flashlight cutting through the dark, but there was no one there. The footsteps started again, this time moving toward the stairwell. I should have stayed put. I should have called the police. But some irrational part of me needed to know what was happening. I followed the sound, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped my phone. When I reached the stairwell, the door was wide open. I shone my flashlight inside, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood on the landing, just out of reach of the light. Its outline was human, but its proportions were wrong, its arms too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Danny," it whispered, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and landing hard on the floor. The figure moved toward me, its footsteps echoing in the darkness. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I fumbled for my car keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure was standing in the parking lot, watching me. I didn't go back to work. I didn't even go back to that part of town. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. "Danny." If I'd known the events of that night, I would have left the gas station behind me and never looked back. Instead, I clocked in like any other shift, completely unaware of the nightmare waiting for me. My name's Ben. I'm 27, and for the past year, I've worked the night shift at a gas station on Route 16. It's one of those lonely stretches of road where you can drive for miles without seeing another car. The station itself is small, surrounded by dense woods on one side and an empty field on the other. I took the job because it was easy. No boss breathing down my neck, just the occasional customer passing through for gas or snacks. It gave me time to think, maybe too much time. That night started like any other. It was late November, and the cold had settled in. The lot was deserted when I arrived at 10 p.m., save for an old pickup truck parked by Pump 3. The driver was an older man wearing a heavy coat and a baseball cap. He looked up as I walked in but didn't say a word. Inside, the store was quiet, the hum of the refrigerators the only sound. I nodded to Dave, the guy on the earlier shift, and he waved me off. "Quiet night," he said, "just the way you like it." I smiled and settled in behind the counter as he left. The first few hours were uneventful, just me and the sound of the occasional car pulling in. Around midnight, I was stocking shelves when the bell above the door chimed. A young woman walked in, her coat pulled tight against the cold. She looked tired, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously around the store. "Hey," I said, offering a friendly smile. "Can I help you with anything?" She hesitated. "Just coffee, thanks." As she poured herself a cup, I noticed her glancing toward the windows. I followed her gaze but didn't see anything unusual. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded quickly, avoiding eye contact. "Yeah, just tired." She paid for the coffee and left without another word. As she drove away, I noticed her taillights vanish quickly into the darkness. I shrugged it off and went back to my routine. An hour later, the unease started. It began with a noise soft, almost imperceptible. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it didn't quite sound right. It was more like— I paused, straining to hear. It seemed to come from outside, near the edge of the woods. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped out into the cold. The lot was empty, and the woods were dark and still. I shone the beam around, my breath visible in the chilly air. "Hello," I called out, feeling a little foolish. No response. I was about to head back inside when I saw a figure standing just beyond the tree line. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, the flashlight shaking in my hand. "You can't be back there. This is private property." Still no response. I backed away, my heart pounding, and locked the door behind me, telling myself it was probably just some drunk or a local messing around. I tried to focus on my tasks, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. At 2 a.m., things escalated. I was behind the counter, flipping through an old magazine, when the lights flickered. It wasn't unusual, this place had lousy wiring, but this time, the power didn't come back on. I grabbed my phone for light and went to check the circuit breaker in the back room. As I reached the door, I heard the whispering again, louder this time. It sounded like it was right outside the back door. I froze, listening. Ben, the sound of my name made my stomach drop. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. Silence. I unlocked the back door and opened it, shining the flashlight into the darkness. The cold night air hit me, and for a moment, everything was still. Then I saw a handprint on the frosted glass of the door. It was fresh, the condensation still dripping. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking. Back at the counter, I tried to call the police, but my phone had no signal. The landline was dead too, probably because of the power outage. That's when the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. I turned, my heart racing, and saw the figure from the woods. It was standing in the lot now, under the dim glow of the emergency lights. It was taller than I'd realized, with long, thin limbs and a face obscured by shadows. "Leave," I shouted, grabbing the bat we kept under the counter. The figure didn't move. Instead, it raised a hand and pressed it against the glass, leaving another frosty handprint. I backed away, my mind racing. What was this? A prank? A hallucination? The figure disappeared before I could decide. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, leaving nothing but the faint outline of the handprint. I spent the next hour locked in the back room, gripping the bat and jumping at every sound. At 4 a.m., I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, moving through the aisles. I peeked through the crack in the door, but I didn't see anyone. The footsteps continued, growing closer to the back room. I held my breath, clutching the bat tighter. And then the whispering returned, right outside the door. "Ben, let me in." The voice was low and raspy, sending chills down my spine. I screamed, throwing open the door and swinging the bat wildly. The room was empty, but the whispering didn't stop. It was coming from everywhere. "Ben." I ran, out the front door, into the cold, empty lot, and into my car. I didn't look back as I sped away, the gas station shrinking in my rearview mirror. When I got home, I locked every door and window and sat in the corner of my bedroom, shaking. The gas station was closed the next day when I drove by, a sign on the door saying it was temporarily out of service. I quit the job that afternoon. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispering again, soft, persistent, calling my name, and I wonder if it will ever stop. It's been 2 days since my last shift, and I still can't bring myself to sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see the shadows crawling across the walls, hear the faint hum of machinery, and feel the oppressive silence of the building. My name is Ben, and I'm a 27-year-old security guard. I took the job because it seemed easy: sit in a booth, watch some cameras, and get paid. But last Friday night, something happened that I can't explain. I worked the night shift at an office building downtown. It's one of those modern skyscrapers with reflective glass and sleek metal everywhere. During the day, it's buzzing with people, but at night, it's a ghost town. My job is simple: patrol the floors every hour, check for anything unusual, and make sure the doors are locked. For the most part, it's boring. That night started like any other. I clocked in at 10 p.m., grabbed my flashlight, and settled into the security room. The monitors showed the empty hallways and offices. Occasionally, the cleaning crew would appear, vacuuming or wiping down desks, but they usually left by midnight. By then, it was just me in the building. Around 1 a.m., I did my first patrol. The elevators hummed as I ascended to the top floor. Walking through the empty hallways always felt a bit eerie, but I'd gotten used to it. The hum of the fluorescent lights and the echo of my footsteps were the only sounds. Everything seemed normal until I reached the 12th floor. The air felt different there, colder, still. I noticed it as soon as the elevator doors opened. At first, I thought the building's HVAC system was acting up, but as I watched the floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I passed rows of cubicles, my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. Then I saw a chair at one of the desks spinning slowly, as if someone had just pushed it. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding much smaller than I expected. No response. I walked over to the desk. There was nothing unusual. No signs of anyone. I chalked it up to the air conditioning and continued my patrol. Back in the security room, I rewound the camera feed for the 12th floor. I expected to see nothing, maybe a trick of the light. But what I saw made my stomach twist. The chair hadn't just started spinning on its own. It had been still, then suddenly jerked as if someone had shoved it hard. The camera didn't show anyone. I told myself it was just the building settling, that I was overthinking it. I didn't want to let my imagination run wild. By 3 a.m., I was back on the 12th floor for my second patrol. This time, I felt it the moment the elevator doors opened a weight in the air. I stepped out cautiously, my flashlight sweeping the darkened hallways. As I turned a corner, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from one of the conference rooms. "Anyone here?" I called out, trying to sound authoritative. The tapping stopped. I approached the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. The room was empty, just a long table surrounded by chairs. But on the glass wall opposite me, there were Smudge's handprints. They were faint, but they were there, trailing down the glass as if someone had been dragged. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding. This wasn't normal. I needed to leave, but as I turned to head back to the elevator, the lights in the hallway flickered and went out. Panic set in. I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on, the beams slicing through the darkness. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, the silence broken only by my ragged breathing. Then I heard a whisper. It was faint, just on the edge of hearing. I couldn't make out the words, but it was close, too close. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer. I started walking quickly, nearly running, back to the elevator. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, like there was someone else following me. When I reached the elevator, the doors were open, waiting. I stepped in and hit the button for the ground floor. As the doors slid shut, I caught a glimpse of the hallway behind me. For a split second, I thought I saw a shadow, a figure standing at the far end, watching me. I told myself I imagined it, but as the elevator descended, the whispering started again. This time, it was louder, clearer. Then, I froze. My name. The elevator stopped suddenly, jerking me forward. The panel read 12. The doors opened, and I was back on that floor. "No, no, no," I muttered, frantically hitting the closed door button, but the elevator wouldn't respond. The hallway was pitch black, my flashlight the only source of light. The whispering grew louder, coming from all around me. I felt something brush past me, cold and light, like a breeze. I stumbled out of the elevator, my legs trembling. I needed to find the stairs to get out of this building. As I turned a corner, my flashlight flickered. For a moment, it illuminated a figure standing at the end of the hallway, tall, thin, its face obscured. I ran. I didn't look back. The stairs were ahead, the door slightly ajar. I burst through and ran down, not stopping until I reached the ground floor. When I finally emerged onto the street, the cold night air hit me like a slap. The city was quiet, normal, indifferent to what I'd just experienced. I quit the next day. I don't know what I saw, or if I imagined it all, but every time I think about going back there, I feel that weight on my chest, hear that whisper in my ear. I still work nights, but not alone. Never alone. It's funny how quickly a routine can turn into a nightmare. You start the day like any other, assuming you know what's coming. I thought I did. I was wrong. My name is Greg. I'm 34, married, no kids. I work the night shift at a small convenience store on the outskirts of town. It's a quiet area, mostly surrounded by empty lots and a few warehouses. Nothing exciting ever happens, which is exactly what I wanted. After years of dealing with the chaos of working in retail during the day, the solitude of night shifts felt like a blessing. But last Tuesday, everything changed. It started just after midnight. The store was empty, the way it usually is at that hour. I'd brought a book to pass the time, but my eyes kept drifting to the security monitors. The habit started a few months ago, after some kids tried to shoplift a case of beer. Since then, I'd glance up every few minutes, even though nothing ever happened. That night, though, the monitors felt different. At first, I couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. The black and white feed showed the usual, the parking lot, the aisles, the entrance, but the longer I stared, the more I noticed. The shadows in the lot seemed to stretch too far, like they were reaching for something. The fluorescent lights in the aisles flickered occasionally, which they never did before. Then, I saw it. A figure on the far edge of the parking lot. It was just standing there, barely within the camera's range. I squinted at the monitor, trying to make out any details, but the screen's resolution wasn't great. All I could see was that it was tall, maybe a man, and motionless. I told myself it was nothing. Probably someone waiting for a ride or a truck driver stretching their legs. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. The figure didn't move. It didn't even shift its weight, just stood there. To distract myself, I went to restock the shelves. It was the part of the job I liked, mindless, repetitive, and quiet. I started in the chips aisle, pulling boxes from the stockroom and lining the shelves. The store's silence was soothing at first, but then I noticed how oppressive it was. No hum of the cooler, no distant traffic noise, just silence. And then, faintly, I heard it, the sound of the automatic doors sliding open. "Hello," I called out, my voice louder than I intended. No response. I walked to the front of the store, my heart thudding against my ribs. The doors were closed and the parking lot was empty except for the figure. It was closer now. The edge of the shadows obscured its face, but I could tell it was looking directly at the store. My skin prickled and my mouth went dry. I locked the doors. It wasn't policy, but I didn't care. Back behind the counter, I kept one eye on the monitors. The figure didn't move. I tried to focus on my book, but the words blurred together. Every time I looked up, it was still there, closer than before. At 2 a.m., I called my wife. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Greg, what's wrong?" she asked groggily. "Nothing. Just wanted to hear your voice." She sighed. "You're working yourself up again. It's just the night shift. Everything feels weirder when it's dark." "Yeah, maybe." We talked for a few more minutes before she told me to get some sleep when I got home. I promised I would, even though I doubted I could. When I hung up, the store was even quieter. The air felt thick, and the shadows seemed darker. I glanced at the monitors again. The figure was gone. Relief washed over me. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I took a deep breath and tried to laugh it off, and then the power went out. The sudden darkness was absolute. The hum of the cooler, the faint buzz of the lights all gone. My breathing sounded too loud in the silence. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the aisles in stark, unnatural light. "Damn it," I muttered, heading for the back room where the breaker box was. The narrow hallway leading there felt longer than usual. The beam of my flashlight wavered as my hands shook. When I reached the breaker box, I flipped the main switch. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. That's when I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. It was faint but unmistakable, coming from the store. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. The scraping stopped. I backed away slowly, keeping the flashlight pointed ahead. When I reached the edge of the hallway, I peeked around the corner. The store was empty, but one of the shelves was overturned. Its contents spilled across the floor. I didn't hear the shelf fall. Something moved in the corner of my vision. I spun around, the flashlight's beam landing on nothing. My heart pounded so loudly, it felt like the sound filled the room. I grabbed the phone behind the counter and dialed 911. "This is Greg Walters. I'm at the Sunrise Gas and Grocery on Route 9. There's someone in the store, I think." "Someone? Can you describe them?" "No, I don't know. They're not here now, but..." The scraping sound came again, louder this time. "They're here," I whispered. "We're sending a unit to your location. Stay on the line." I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. The sound was getting closer, echoing through the aisles, and then I saw it. A shadow moved across the wall, tall and distorted. It didn't match the shape of any person. It stretched unnaturally, shifting and bending in ways that made my stomach churn. I backed toward the door, but my legs felt heavy, like I was wading through water. "Sir, are you still there?" the dispatcher asked. "They're here," I whispered again. The shadow stopped moving, but I felt it watching me. The doors behind me slid open with a soft hiss. I didn't think. I ran. The cold night air hit my face like a slap. I kept running until I reached the edge of the parking lot. Turning back, I expected to see the figure. The store was empty, silent. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They found nothing. No overturned shelf, no sign of forced entry, nothing. They said it was probably just a prank or my imagination, but I know what I saw. I quit the next morning. My wife thinks I'm overreacting, but I don't care. Something was in that store with me, something that wasn't human. And now, every time I close my eyes, I see that shadow moving toward me, waiting, watching.